So yeah, it's a pretty ambitious title. Like I came up with the title for this talk, How to Change the World with the Girl Computer. And then I realized I had to write the talk for it and fit it all into 30 minutes. And I thought maybe I made a mistake making that talk title that way, because it's just so much stuff. And I didn't know how to fit it all in there. But I had already given them the talk title, so I was stuck. And I had to stick with it. So I had to do it somehow. So I think I put together a basic story of how I think this could all work out. And that's kind of what I decided I would start out with, is just telling a story. And I'm going to start out with telling my story of how that all fits in. So I am a designer. I always have to qualify that, especially in this crowd, because I think there's a lot of designers. You probably wouldn't know exactly. I have no design experience whatsoever, education. I'm a designer at a software company. So I have a complete web interactive background. And right now I do a little bit of visual design, but I do mostly web interface type stuff, and I also do front-end development, so actually building out interfaces, things like that. My background is in computer science, actually, so I've always been a little bit more of an artistic person, but I started getting into HTML, started making web pages, and I thought that was really cool, and I wanted to make bigger things, so I jumped into a computer science program, which was not all that great of an idea, it turns out, because it wasn't really built up for people who just wanted to jump in, and who come from a slightly different perspective. I learned some really interesting things studying computer science. I learned that I was one of 2 female computer science majors in my entire college. I learned that usually I was the only girl in class and that nobody else in the class really wanted to talk to me. I learned a lot of interesting things like that. I also learned that there's this attitude in there which wasn't deliberate, but kind of came out anyway, that if you didn't already know this, then why were you here? And so it was, it was a strange thing. And it started, basically the conclusion I came to that was my fault. Thought, well, I'm just too naturally like artsy and I don't understand how to do this other stuff naturally. And I can't really learn and it's just me. But then an interesting thing happened where I was a counselor at a tech camp that was being held at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, which if you don't know, Carnegie Mellon is one of the most prestigious computer science schools in the country. The people there are really smart. They really know what they're doing. And we had another counselor who was a computer science major there, who was a woman, and she was teaching our programming class to the kids at the camp. And I started talking to her about some of these things that I was feeling, like, yeah, I'm a computer science major, but I feel like I don't belong there at all. I feel like nobody wants to talk to me. I feel like I have no support network. I feel like I just shouldn't be there, period. And this woman, who was a very successful student at a really prestigious computer science school, who knew all her stuff and she was naturally good at this and had parents who were professors, she's like, yeah, I feel the exact same way. And all of a sudden it was like this light bulb. I'm like, oh, maybe it's not entirely me. Like, yeah, maybe I'm a factor, but maybe there's something else. There's another part of this story. Maybe there's a bigger story going on than just my little personal narrative of not being able to do this. And so that's when I started thinking about what's the bigger story here. There's this book called Unlocking the Clubhouse, Women in Computing. It was published in 2001. It was actually, the research for it was done at Carnegie Mellon, and this woman that I had met at Carnegie Mellon suggested I read this. And it's all about women in the computing field, why not many of them are there, and how they feel about that. And almost all of the personal stories in this book were women saying that I didn't know other women felt the same way. I thought it was just me. I thought I didn't belong here. I thought I couldn't do this stuff. I thought that I just wasn't right for this. And so reading more of this stuff and learning more of this stuff was really kind of a revelation. I started to think that there's a bigger story about how we have this thing set up and how women can do things. So these are some of the other things that I look into. I don't want you to take this just about me. So I have some numbers for you of percentages that we have in different areas. In computer science undergrad programs right now, 18% of the students are female. In information technology jobs, only 25% of them are women. 13% of the people contributing to Wikipedia are women. In open source programming, which if you're not familiar with programming that isn't, doesn't have corporate licenses or anything like that, people do open and is freely available, there's 1.5% women contributing to that. And in the general web design and development field, and this is a stat that was given by a list apart in their survey I got together, it was only 18% of all the people who are making websites are female. And so then, okay, so we have this, and we have the story of this is happening. Why is this? There's a few different reasons. There's ideas of there aren't very many role models here. It's really hard to do this work-life balance thing. I'm a single mother, I understand that. Women still carry the majority of childcare responsibilities. It's really hard to do all that kind of stuff. Sometimes they get passed over for promotions. There's a lot of workplace drama and intrigue that goes on with that. There's harassment, there's sexism that's inherent in culture that pops out sometimes. And sometimes it's just really hard when it's just you and you don't have a network and you don't have isolation. Or you are isolated and you don't have people to back you up. So over the years, from my own experiences, my own personal narrative, I ended up building this larger story, this larger picture of things that I saw a lot of other women were going through. And that it seemed to be really hampering things that we're able to make because we're kind of limiting our field of people coming into making things to a certain type of stereotype. So after a few years of that, I decided that we should do something about it. This is the website for a program called Girl Develop at Columbus, which I run. I live in Columbus now. I grew up in northeastern Ohio, but now I live in Columbus, so I started a program in Columbus. Girl Develop It is a larger organization that was started by 2 female programmers in New York. And they happened to do that just right before I wanted to do something similar, so I hooked up with them and be like, hey, can I steal like your name and your logo so I don't have to make new one up? And they're like, sure, go for it. So we did that. And so we created, the idea was if we have a problem going on now where women are not able to create things in a field or get by in a field because of factors that have nothing to do with really, their abilities or anything like that, then let's remove all those barriers and create an environment where they can do that and see what happens. So we created a series of classes. We offer intro to programming classes, we offer introductory HTML, CSS classes, we offer more advanced classes, things like JavaScript and other areas that we're still getting into, aimed at women. They're not restricted to women, but they are aimed at women, and they're low cost. We try to be very flexible with the schedules, and we try to build an environment where people can go in and learn. So some of the things that we tried to make sure that we were doing in this series of courses, from the very beginning, we try to establish good communication channels. So if people are feeling lost, they shouldn't feel like they're stupid and they can't ask any questions, so they can always talk, and we can have good feedback loops going on with the teachers and the students. We make sure when we're teaching people, we provide a lot of context and definitions so that they don't have to feel like that lost, and they don't feel like they even have to ask in the first place, because we're not acting like they should already know it, that we're giving it to them already. And that goes into making students feel comfortable enough that if they make a mistake or if they don't know something, that they can do that, and it's not a big deal. And we also want to create a structure with it. We have lots of teaching assistants, and after you're done with the classes, you still have a community where you can learn things. And so we want to create a whole support structure so people can learn these things, have people to ask for things, even out of class. And we also want to make sure we're treating the students as individuals. And that is one of the most important things that I think in building all of this is just this idea of, I actually gave a version of this talk to a group of software developers, which is the complete opposite crowd of you guys in some ways. And I was targeting it the same way, and when I was giving this talk, I found out later that somebody on Twitter said, hey, nothing she said so far has anything to do with women. It's like, what is this all about? Like, yeah, that's kind of the point. Like, when we're talking about teaching classes for women, you don't use special language or colors so their brains can understand it better. Like, that's not the point. The whole point is that it's not about, just a stereotype of what women are. So we decided, even though we have it kind of branded with a certain identity, when you're actually in class, the idea is that you're a unique individual and you have your own identity and you have your own backgrounds and your own experiences to bring into it, and we pay attention to that. And we found out when we do that, that means that we open the doors up to everybody. So like one of our first intro to programming classes not only was almost entirely women, it was also almost 40% African American women who are severely underrepresented in computer science. And we didn't actively go after a certain demographic, we just opened the doors up and said, we want to value you as a unique person and that there are no stereotypes for what you can do or be. And they just came in. And that goes in the same line is that almost all of our classes, we usually have a couple male students, which is, I think, is really fabulous. We let them come in, they're allowed, it's okay. There's no cooties or anything like that. But I've had so many men who have come up and say, I really like the idea of a classroom that is very welcoming and inclusive, and that I don't have to feel dumb in, and it doesn't feel like I have to be a certain thing or know certain things to come in there. They don't care that it's branded for women. They're really after that other stuff, which is really what it's about in the first place. I think I like this picture so much. So when you have, I think identities are important. I like the fact that, we reach out to women and we talk about girls, and that's awesome. But basically the underlying theory is, people are individuals, and you can cross those barriers. As long as we're doing that, there's all this cross-pollination that can go on, and it's a lot of fun. So Girl Development as a whole now we have 6 chapters actually. New ones are being created all the time, I can't keep up. So there's the original chapter in New York, there's one in Columbus, which is the second one we started. There's one in Ottawa, there is one in Philadelphia, there is one in Austin, Texas, and we just started one in Cincinnati. So that's right, there's one in Columbus and Cincinnati, so you guys know what you need to do next, right? So altogether, about a few months ago, there was a friend of Girl Develop that put together this infographic. It's a lot bigger, but I just focused on this part after we hit 1,000 students. And if you can't read some of the smaller print up there, that some of the survey results that we got from our students were about 48% after they had taken a class started a personal development project. About 42% have used what they learned in the class in a professional setting. And over 63% said they were less afraid to develop software after taking the class. So those are just, some very small, we saw this problem, we created a solution targeted for that, and it seems like we got some results out of it, or at least on an individual level. We saw women who, changed their minds about their abilities and what they can do, and what they can do professionally and contribute professionally, based on taking a class that didn't make them feel dumb. And I saw that, I've seen that personally in our local group of women who have done that and come to me and say, like, I didn't think there's been a lot of graphic designers who are now learning HTML and starting getting into deeper development tasks. And, they said, I didn't think I could ever understand this stuff, but now I can. And that just opens up a whole other thing. And that is really, really exciting to have this idea of, there's no reason why they thought they couldn't do it. Nobody had just ever taken the time to say that just because you don't fit the stereotype of a programmer, you can actually still do all this stuff. And so just making that point and making it available to them has opened up a whole new worlds of what they can do. And so when people are changing their jobs based on this, they're changing their hobbies, they're doing things for, or maybe they are just doing it because they like it. We've had a group, I teach the HTML class, not our last class, but the one before that. We're actually so into what they were doing, they formed their own study group, got together and started doing a website for a local nonprofit farm, and did it pro bono as a learning exercise, and then gave the site over to the farm as something they could do, and they did it all on their own, totally on their own initiative, and I thought that was a really awesome thing. So on a very individual, personal level, it's definitely, I've been able to see how just reaching out is changing the way people look at things. But, that brings around to the idea, that's very nice, it's nice, warm, and fuzzy, but we want to change the world. So how does that fit in with everything? And this is where I'm going to pull in another quote from somebody. I think it was about last fall, maybe. First Lady Michelle Obama was at I think it was a kickoff, a government initiative to increase awareness and improve the conditions around work-life balance for women in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math fields. This is her quote. I think you can read it pretty well. I will, because the color's a little funky. So, in her speech, she said, "If we're going to out-innovate and out-educate the rest of the world, then we have to open doors to everyone. We need all hands on deck. And that means clearing hurdles for women and girls as they navigate careers in science, technology, engineering, and math." I really like this quote because she hit on the 3 points that I like to make all the time about why we're doing this. Some people will have ideas about why we're doing this. It's not because I think girls deserve special treatment. It's not because I think their brains are weaker and they need help. It's not really for any of these things. But there are 3 reasons that she hit on here. I'm going to go through all of them. The first one is clearing hurdles. As I talked about earlier in there, the most immediate reason is that there are reasons that women are not doing these type of things and making these type of things that have nothing to do with their abilities for making these type of things. There are other external factors. Those are hurdles, and those shouldn't be there. So we're just going to clear those out of the way, and that's the first reason I want to do something like this. The second reason is that if we want to make things and make cool things and make more things, we need more people to do that. And we don't need to go overseas. We don't need to go anywhere else. We have a huge untapped pool of talent here that we could get into be building applications, building websites, building more methods of communication in this digital age that we live in. We need more people to be doing this. There's a lot of them right there. If the only reason that they're not doing it is because they don't think they can, we can easily fix that and we can bring a lot more people into what we're doing. The other one is out-innovate and out-educate. Sounds a little antagonistic. I don't really think that we need to go to war with these things, these ideas, but there is a sense that we want to progress, if we want to keep innovating, if we want to come up with new ideas. I think it just makes common sense that we're going to need people who have different experiences, different backgrounds, different ideas to contribute to that. Again, with having more people, period. So the end result of us having a bigger mix of people into a certain field to make things is going to be that, we're going to be making better stuff, and it's going to be smarter stuff. So when I was thinking about all this too, in terms of how I think as a designer and how I do design and what this all means there. Like, I am an interface designer. I try to create ways and design ways for people to do things better. And there's a lot of times you may have been in this situation before. You may have heard people say that, I tried to use this application, this website, this system, or this something, and I couldn't figure it out, and it must be because I'm really dumb and I don't understand it. And if you're a designer who does stuff like that, the answer to that is almost never that the user is actually dumb. It means that the design in the system was dumb and it was not done right. If you have such a really hard time doing something like that, then it needs to be designed better. So I feel like if we have a system in place that is making people feel dumb who really aren't dumb and getting in the way of what they could be doing, then we can redesign that system. And by putting into place some of these ideas, researching these ideas, seeing what is in their way, and understanding why that is, taking steps to counteract that, figuring out how we can help them get through that and do things in a smart way, then we're kind of redesigning the way people interface with the world and opening up all these avenues for them to do other things in the world and make better things. So I like to think about all this as literally redesigning the interface between people and the world when we fix systems like this that are standing in people's ways. And I think that's all I have for that. I think I went pretty quickly with that. I tend to be very interactive with talks, so if you guys have any questions or anything you want me to expand upon, please bring it up. Yes?
You mentioned you had the program. Do you actually work with kids too? Because that seems to be where girls stuck, not math when they're about 12, 13 years old.
I don't, in my group we don't quite yet, and that's just a purely organizational, it's like, whenever you introduce kids to something, it's 10 times harder just to kind of get all the details worked out. I very much want to. So right now, yes, we are just focusing on classes for adult people who can come into classes themselves, but we are actively working on putting together workshops, and there are initiatives who are focusing on that, kind of on a national-wide basis. There's a really great group called Black Girls Code that focuses on younger girls from the African American community. I've talked about I've hoped to work with them in the future. And there's a great group called Kids Ruby, which focuses on teaching the Ruby programming language, and they have things for kids. They go to conferences and set up camps and things like that. So hopefully I'm going to be working with those people and setting up some of our own things in the future. Anybody else? Okay, sorry, you're in front of me, I can't even see you.
How do we get involved in our own respective cities and towns with this movement?
Well, and there's lots of different groups who are doing things like this. As far as Girl Develop It it's a very grassroots, just start it, and then if you're interested in actually being an actual chapter, then, just come to somebody who does it and they'll put you in touch with the right people, and it's basically just, hey, you make it and you do it. There's lots of other groups who are doing the same things who aren't part of our little group. There's a group in Toronto called Ladies Who Code. There's another group in Philly who is doing the exact same things, and they all have slightly different focus, and basically the biggest thing they have in common is they just decided they're going to get together and start something. So as far as the nuts and bolts of doing that, it's a good place if you can find a place to have class, has Wi-Fi. If you want to focus on adults who can bring their own equipment, which is why we do focus on adults right now, because we just don't have equipment to give to other people. But if you can find donated space, find donated equipment, and just have people come to you, and then get qualified teachers. Get programmers or designers or professionals from the community who are willing to donate their time. You pretty much have everything you need right there. So it's just a matter of getting passionate people on board and getting the actual physical requirements down, and then just seeing what you can do. Yes?
You spoke about clearing out hurdles for your students.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious, what were some of the hurdles that you faced for yourself in trying to develop this program here?
That's a very interesting question. My biggest personal hurdle is that I tend to just jump into things and figure it out as I go. So there's definitely a lot of things that we learned the hard way. We learned about sometimes when it comes to finding teachers and people who can communicate these ideas in the community, there's a difference between, somebody could be really good at programming and they could be really good at making whatever they do at their job. They may not be a good teacher. They might not be able to communicate that effectively. And maybe they might be a good teacher for people like them, but they might not be a good teacher for beginners who kind of need someone to not make them feel dumb. So I think our biggest hurdle was finding the right people to teach our classes, and unfortunately there's a little bit of trial and error involved in some of that. So the way I try to approach any kind of mistakes we made along the way of putting this together was just being transparent. I mean, just like students in the class who are learning about things and are being made to feel that it's okay to make mistakes, it's like we're doing the same thing and we're learning how to put this together, and we just want to be honest, and that opens up the feedback channels so that I actively have a lot of the students saying like, if you see something we're not doing right, like let us know so we can fix it. And so we're constantly kind of iterating and improving our process, and I think the key to that is just being open and honest about it and keep trying to make it better. Does anybody else have anything?
I have one.
Yes.
So it seems like Girl Development focuses on teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've hit on some of the other issues, but what do you think are some of the other unmet needs if people were to start their own groups that they could address? Or do you think it's mostly in getting in at the beginning when people are learning? Are there other kinds of needs that women in development need?
So things like maybe like networking and business opportunities and things like that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that, definitely, and I think it matters if somebody is interested in starting their own thing. I think it would just depend on what their particular passion is. My particular passion is making things. Like I like to make things. I make things on the design side. I like making things on the coding side. I like to make websites and applications, and that's just what is cool to me. And so when I thought about it, I'm just like, I want to make something that makes people do that too. Some people are more interested in business, or some people are more interested in networking. I think that in terms of other things that women may need beyond just like plain education or skills, networking is the number one thing. That's what really is all about, because it's something that's so subtle that a lot of people don't realize it. And I'll go ahead and throw in this example. I hope they won't mind, but it's already been out. We did an article about this festival. Noticed that their speaker lineup was very, very male last year, and it wasn't a deliberate thing. It just happened to be, they asked their friends to come speak, and that just happened to be the way it is. And they're like, hey, maybe there are some other interesting people that aren't in our immediate network that we could do, and let's reach out to them and ask them. And now there's a ton of women speaking, and so that's where it comes in with networking. Is your network tends to be things that grow organically, like your little group of friends, and those tend to be people who are like you, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to introducing that into the professional aspects of conferences and recommending people for jobs and job opportunities and things within the professional realm, it's always a good idea to do some more outreach with that. So I think that professional networking for women is really, really important so that we can counteract some of the, the biases that kind of happen naturally in this thing. Was that good on my stuff? Anybody else? Yes?
How do you counteract the stereotype of bitch as a woman leader?
I think there's a couple different strategies. I think the easiest one is just to say that isn't a bad word, and so deal with it. But I don't know. It's a little bit difficult for me. Like I haven't run into a lot of that personally, and I think it just my personality is, I don't know, I'm bubbly, for lack of a better term. So I think that if I act like that, I usually tend to fool people, and they don't really realize what I'm doing. I don't necessarily recommend that. I'm just saying that that's my personal experience. I think in general, this is a lot easier said than done, but it's going to have to be a sense that we're just going to have to say, you can think that, and that's fine, but you're going to do it anyway. And if you get to a point where you're the one in the position of power, it doesn't matter what they say, because you can do it anyway. So, like I said, it's much, much easier said than done, but I can't think of any other way that really could do it right. So, that's probably totally unhelpful, but that's what I got. Yeah?
I agree that everyone's an individual, but I'm curious if you came across anything that you didn't find in a male programmer that a female programmer came up with?
Not a whole lot of things in particular. I think that the way we have now, especially because there aren't as many women in there, when you introduce women into programming teams, I think there does tend to be, just in my personal experience, a little bit more of focus on a larger picture. I work with a lot of software developers, and I love them all dearly. The smartest ones are the ones who are most kind of tend to get wrapped up in little details and kind of lose the whole picture. By and large, in my experience, I think women just seem to be, I don't know if it's socialization or I don't know what it is. They seem to be able to kind of grasp the whole picture a little bit better. So that's really the only thing I've seen. I really do hesitate to draw those lines because there's plenty of women who haven't like that either. I think in general, women being introduced to teams that I've seen, it does change the dynamic a little bit, and it does just tend to kind of be like, oh, let's just think about other scenarios that we might not have thought about because there's somebody that's a little bit different from us, and so you start thinking about things from different perspectives. The book that I mentioned earlier, the Unlocking the Clubhouse book, has some really interesting anecdotes at the beginning about like early on when they did the first computer voice recognition software. Like this was a very long time ago, the first prototypes of that. It literally could not detect women's voices because only men worked on it and they just didn't think about it. So they literally made a piece of software that couldn't hear women at all, literally. Because no women were on the team. It never occurred to them. Like they didn't do it deliberately. It's just like men were making the software. They calibrated the software to their testing and their environment. And then it came out and it was like, oh, wow, yeah. It doesn't work for half of the human population because none of them were helping develop the software for it. There's other anecdotes, the same thing as like crash test dummies, they've done that too, where like people's lives are lived on the line with that, but they do a standard size crash test dummy and then find out later, oh, women and children are different sizes than that, and that kind of has some consequences there. So I think in general, just the idea of having people who are different than you on your team just opens up people's minds to thinking about things from different perspectives, and that just kind of opens a lot of stuff up. Anybody else have anything? I saw somebody pointing, but I didn't see the actual hand. Okay, sorry.
How do you take this message to your universities and high schools, to professors who have some ability to set the tone in their classroom?
That's a very good question. I haven't thought a lot about taking it to established, academia, because I don't know. I guess I kind of idea like, well, we're just going to do it ourselves. So I haven't really interfaced with that a lot. And there's, especially when it comes to coding, there's a lot of people who are just doing it themselves. There's all kinds of hacker academies and code schools that are popping up who are kind of like shying away from anything in there. When it comes to things like high school like that, then it's not as easy to get away with that. But it's a really difficult question because I honestly feel one of the reasons that we are doing stuff like that is that it's so hard to introduce that into the established educational system as we have it. The best thing I can think of is hopefully that we can, those teachers and those professors, would just be, having a sense of the students in their classrooms are coming from different perspectives, and that if they don't get it in a certain way, then it's okay to maybe think of another way to explain it, or maybe there's another way to approach it, instead of just saying, well, I had experiences in my computer science classes where I just, and this has nothing to do with me being a woman exactly, but it does because my brain does work a little bit differently than the typical programmers. Like it's a lot of work for me. Design, art stuff, that comes naturally. I don't have to think about that. Programming, I really have to think about, and I have to think about it in different ways. And I have so many experiences being in my computer science professors' offices and just like, I don't get it that way. Can you explain it a different way to me? And they wanted the help. It wasn't that they didn't, they just didn't understand what that meant. So I think that there's, extrapolating that to kind of like cultural differences, and I just think it's a good idea for them to keep in the perspective that there's people coming in with a lot of different talents, a lot of different backgrounds and experiences, and keeping that in mind as they're teaching so that it doesn't tend to, whether deliberately or not, get into a sense of this is how we do it and this is how you understand it, and if you don't, then it doesn't work. And I think, on top of that, then hopefully if they are having a really hard time with getting some of that stuff across, maybe the schools would be more willing to partner with some groups like this, or other groups that would be willing to step in and provide support for students when professors can't. Anybody else? Yes? Yeah, sure.
I thought you answered the question about being
It often has more to do with the person calling than the person being called. So that's an important thing to keep in track and keep in mind too, that a lot of times there's a lot of baggage that goes along with that, so you don't want to take anybody else's baggage on yours, and I think owning it is a good way of doing that. So, thank you.